collect the donations, or alternatively, you can also use the QR codes just at the front. Thank you. Hi guys, for those who are struggling to get onto the Wi-Fi, it's just Bloomsbury Visitor, and then it's all one word, lowercase, Bloomsbury for the password, all right? Thank you.
Good evening, everyone. Thank you so much for being here this evening. My name is Dr. Omar Abdel Manen. I'm co-founder and president of Health Workers for Palestine. It is an absolute honor to be here. I'd like to first of all welcome Reverend Dr. Simon Woodman, a very good friend, and the host this evening, who's very generously provided us with this beautiful church for this evening's panel. So Simon, please come and say a few words. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Omar. It's an absolute delight to welcome you all to this beautiful building, which has been a centre for justice in the city and globally for 175 years now. 3 years after it was founded, it was 1851, the year of the Great Exhibition here in London, and there were American Baptists visiting London wanting to visit the shiny new Baptist church that had recently been built. And they were coming with checkbooks and ready to make donations. So the church took an advert in the Times and said, you are welcome, if you're visiting for the Great Exhibition, to come to Bloomsbury Baptist Chapel, unless you are someone who supports the fugitive slave law, in which case you are denied access to the communion table. So they excommunicated people on the basis of an issue of racial exclusion. I think that shapes something quite profound about a community. Fast forward 100 years, we get to 1961, and we've got the Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King preaching here. First time he preached in the UK, and just earlier this year we had the American ambassador unveil a blue plaque to commemorate that. So you can have a look at that on the wall on your way out. And here we are today hosting another important moment in the global history of justice. So it's a real delight to welcome you here. I wanted to just share something with you that I wrote a few years ago. Some of you may know that in the Gospels, in the New Testament, Jesus gives this little introduction to one of his sermons, a sermon known as the Sermon on the Mount. And it's just a series of very short sayings that are known as the Beatitudes. And one of my jobs as a preacher is to try and take the words of the Bible and kind of bring them to life for my congregation. So I decided I'd paraphrase Jesus' words. So these are my words, but they are inspired by what Jesus said. This is fairly short, and then I'll hand back over to our panelists. Blessed are those who refuse the lie that one life is worth more than any other, for theirs is the future of humanity. Blessed are those who have stared long into the abyss, for theirs is honesty beyond grief. Blessed are those who resist retaliation, for the earth will never be won by force. Blessed are those who would rather die for truth than live with compromise, for the truth will outlive all lies. Blessed are those who forgive the unforgivable, for they have seen the darkness of their own souls. Blessed are those who know themselves truly, for they have seen themselves as God sees them. Blessed are those who are provocatively non-violent, for they're following the path of the Son of God. Blessed are those who choose to receive violence but not to give it, for the future is born out of such choices. Blessed are you when you stand up for truth, and hell itself decides to try and destroy you. You're not the first, and you won't be the last. I'm telling you now, nothing makes any sense unless you learn to see it differently, and then choose to live that alternative into being. So, I'm delighted to welcome our panelists. I'm going to hand back over one last plug, if I may. Some of you will know Rola Azar, the Palestinian singer. She's absolutely amazing, and she is performing here on Friday the 14th of June at 7 p.m. as a fundraiser for medical aid for Palestinians. Details of how to buy tickets are on our church website, but if you're free and you want to come and be part of that evening, it's going to be brilliant. Please do so. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Simon. Ladies and gentlemen, distinguished guests, welcome to this unique and exciting panel, Healthcare Under Fire. Since the 7th of October, over 600 attacks on healthcare facilities have taken place in Gaza and the West Bank, resulting in the killing of over 500 healthcare workers and almost every hospital and clinic in Gaza being made non-functional. Over 200 health workers have been abducted by Israeli forces, many of whom were tortured even to death, as was the case of Dr. Adnan Al-Burj, the head of orthopedics at Al-Shifa Hospital. And just overnight, we watched horror scenes from Rafah after repeated attacks on a UN aid shelter, resulting in Palestinian children and civilians being burnt alive in their tents. So, how did we get to this point? What does an attack on healthcare workers actually look like firsthand? And what legal steps are being taken to hold accountable those responsible for and complicit in these war crimes? And how, as a collective body of health workers and other professionals, can we react in a positive manner to manifest actual change when our leaders are so impotent? These are some of the questions that our expert panel will answer this evening. Before I hand over to our distinguished panel, I'd like to thank a few key players that have made this evening possible. Tonight's event has come about as a result of the hard work of a number of students representing student societies across London, namely the Student Iraqi Medical Association, SEMA, the Pakistani Association of Medical Students and Academic, PAMSA, and the Salam Center Medical Association. And a big thanks to Mariam, Mina, Zainab, and Iman, amongst many others. So please give them a warm round of applause for their efforts. And whilst tonight is not about patting each other on the back for the work we have been doing, I do want to pay a special tribute to the students in particular. They have been nothing less than a beacon of hope at a time of hopelessness. And their bravery in setting up the encampments across London and the UK universities has given us all renewed vigor and courage to speak up and continue our activism. So thank you to them for their decency, their courage, and their humanity. And finally, I'd like to mention the two charities that your generous donations coming to this event, and hopefully more this evening, will help. Fajr Scientific is a US-based surgical NGO led by a Gazan CEO that is currently providing life-saving treatment to Gazans and has thus far sent in 2 missions into Gaza since the 7th of October, working in the European Gaza Hospital. Prior to the 7th of October, they sent the largest medical mission into Gaza in August, providing 150 operations in 1 week and leaving millions of dollars worth of medical implants behind for the people of Gaza to use. The Palestine Medical Relief Society is a Palestinian NGO set up in 1979 by a group of Palestinian medics that has been providing primary health care across the territories for decades and is run by Dr. Mustafa Barghouti. He has made a significant contribution to the creation of a Palestinian national healthcare infrastructure, replacing the fragmented health system inherited from years of Israeli occupation. Since the 7th of October, they have suffered sustained attacks on their facilities, and your support to them is crucial for their continued work as an ever-present NGO on the ground. So please do donate generously. There'll be QR codes appearing on your screens. There'll be card machines around the venue, so feel free to donate further to them. So without further ado, I'd like to hand over to my good friend and colleague, Dr. Musa Qureshi, who'll be moderating tonight's panel. Musa has the unique position of being being a medical practitioner as a NHS hematology consultant and also providing groundbreaking legal advocacy in campaigns in the NHS. And I'm very excited to hear him ask the tough questions this evening that no one is asking. So thank you, Musa, and I'll hand over to you.
Good evening, everybody. So I'm going to introduce our panel in a few moments. It's a great honor to have this panel. They're a very special panel with real on-the-ground experience of fighting for this cause. But it's important that this audience understands that this is not about us up on this stage. This is about you. You have the power. The first rule of Fight Club here is that you have the power. This is about you. The second rule of Fight Club is that there's not going to be any easy questions tonight. The Palestinian people are not dealing with easy questions. The people in Gaza are not dealing with easy questions. And certainly, Rafah is not a place for easy questions now. And we'd be doing a great disservice to them if we felt comfortable after this event tonight. We've got an amazing panel who are more than capable of taking the tough questions. We're going to throw some tough questions at them, and we'd like the audience to do the same. And the last thing before I actually go ahead and introduce our panel is just to say this is a very special venue. This church, this sacred space, is where Martin Luther King Jr. gave his first British sermon. And what we need to understand is that we're standing on the shoulders of giants who have shown us that this can be done. This is not some remote possibility. This is an inevitability, but it's only inevitable if we make it inevitable. So without further ado, I'm going to introduce our panel. Shall I start with Professor Tahsin Qureshi, if you can please take your seat. So Professor Tahsin Qureshi is an expert in robotic surgery. He's an internationally renowned expert in laparoscopic surgery. He's been involved for several years, since 2019, in trying to set up a tertiary center for cancer services in Gaza and in Palestine. And he was recently working in Nasser Hospital during the conflict in Gaza. If we can, thank you. If we can have after that Professor Nick Maynard. Professor Nick Maynard is another professor of surgery, extremely eminent. He was the head of cancer services at Oxford University Hospital's NHS Trust for many years. He was the president of the Association of Upper GI Surgery of Great Britain and Ireland. He has also been involved for many years in medical education. He has also served in Gaza during this conflict. If we could next have Tayyab Ali. So I'm really pleased to have Tayyab Ali here today. He is an eminent lawyer. He is the director of the International Center for Justice for Palestinians. He is the head of international law at one of the biggest law firms in the UK, Binmans, and he has the distinguished sort of history of having managed to get an arrest warrant for an Israeli minister in 2009 in the British courts. So please thank him. And last but not least, if we can have Amira Nimarawi. So Amira Nimarawi started off working as a nurse, then went into healthcare finance, then got a master's in public health, then got an MBA, and now she's playing a key role in Mustafa Margouti's organization, the Palestinian Relief Medical Association, working with multiple NGOs, trying to get aid to people in Gaza and to Palestinian people who have managed to take refuge in Egypt. She is also the chief executive officer of probably the most dynamic healthcare activist organization I've come across, and I've come across a few, and that's Health Workers for Palestine. So please give her a round of applause. I think we should start. Okay, I'm just going to take the microphone down, then we'll start the questions. I'm going to start with some easy questions. I won't go straight into the tough questions. So Nick, when I interviewed you in March, when I first interviewed you, we were talking about the prospect of an invasion of Rafah. And at that time, I remember you told me that an invasion would be apocalyptic. Now, you've just quite recently returned from Gaza on the 6th of May, just on the eve of the actual invasion, just as it was getting underway. Can you describe what your last mission to Gaza was like, what you saw while you were there, and what happened as you left Rafah?
Yeah, this was my second mission since October the 7th, and it was different to the first one. The first mission over Christmas and New Year, we saw a huge amount of trauma severe blast injuries, burn injuries. We saw slightly less of that on this occasion, but we saw, and with my colleague Yasser, who was one of the surgeons out there with me in the audience, we saw some awful cases as a result of malnutrition. So these are all patients who'd had serious blast or gunshot injuries a few days, a few weeks before, who had already had surgery, some by other people, some by us, but they'd developed terrible complications because of malnutrition. And that was the really strong narrative from our most recent trip, and how devastating the impact of malnutrition is. And it's not just about people losing weight. This is about major injuries not healing, tissues not healing, intestinal repairs leaking. So these poor people having their bowel contents leaking out of their wounds. And Yasser and I saw some appalling cases, including two young females, Tala, who was 16, and Lama, who was 18, both of whom had survivable injuries, both of whom had multiple operations, and both of whom died when we were there as a direct result of the complications of malnutrition. So that was the really strong narrative. And on our final day, as we left through Rafah, that was the day, May the 6th, where there'd been issued the first orders to evacuate, and of course the bombing started that day before they had evacuated. And as we left through Rafah, we saw many, many Rafah inhabitants beginning to evacuate, leaving their shelters, leaving their tents, leaving the homes to which they'd already been displaced many occasions. And of course, as we got to the crossing, we were surrounded by bombs going off, and that was really we got out at about 4 o'clock in the afternoon. We were the last people to get out before the Israeli Defense Force invaded the crossing, and it's been closed ever since.
Okay, so that's obviously a painful story to tell. My next question is for Tarsi. So you went to Gaza with a medical aid organization in January, and I understand your guest house, a guest house for medical aid workers, was actually bombed by the Israeli Air Force. Can you talk us through what happened, why you think the guest house was targeted, and what you think of the response of the British government?
That was the easy question, wasn't it? So, look, just some pretext. The safe house was chosen as a safe house because in days gone by, it was a guest house. So it's way away from other houses. So nobody could then say, well, we were aiming for that, I'm sorry we got you. And it's also built on sand, so you can't build tunnels in sand. So it was chosen as a safe house for that reason. What was it like being bombed? Well, you can understand that it's etched in my mind. It's very clear as though it happened yesterday, so the narrative won't change over time. We had just laid down after the morning prayer, what we call the Fajr prayer, so it was dark. And I was talking to my counterpart. There was two of us in each room, and we were just talking about banal stuff. And then the only way I can describe it is that there was a blinding flash of light. In fact, before that, you'd hear aeroplanes all the time. That's not unusual. But the difference this time was that I heard a whine, like bzzz, just like that. And then there was a blinding flash of light. And it was as though the house was lifted up off its foundations and just dropped down again. So as soon as that happened, we were worried about not ourselves. We were worried because we'd taken the conscious decision to put ourselves in that situation. But the guest houses were babysat by families, Gazan families. And there was a 6-year-old and an 8-year-old with us. So there was a guy called Sajid and his sister. So our first thought was for them, and they were fine. But then we knew that when jets passed, there's 2 wings to the jet, and usually there was double ordnance fired. So we were waiting for the next one. And then as time elapsed, we then realized that actually it was just going to be one. Words are difficult, pictures are much better, but the whole ceiling fell down, all the windows came down. We had like patio doors in our bedroom, the doors came off their hinges. We were pretty much thrown onto the floor. So that was the experience. Etched in my mind. How do I feel about it? To be honest with you, this is what the Palestinians, I now understand what the Palestinians go through every single day. And I give this sort of talk in advocacy, and I make a very strong point that this isn't about me, and don't make it about me. This is just, wow, this is what they go through. And honestly, as soon as that happened to us, we wanted to go back to the hospital, but all the NGOs understandably were told no. And the thing that was really heartbreaking was the Gazans. The Gazans, you fall in love with Palestinians, you fall in love with the Gazans, and I can't tell you why, you just do. That's something that comes across with whoever visits Gaza. But they didn't understand why we would put ourselves in that position in the first place. But when this happened, they felt awful. So they literally, it was like they picked us up on a pedestal and wouldn't let our feet touch the ground, metaphorically speaking. And they protected us as best they could for the 2 days until we got the deconfliction permission to go back out through Rafah. And then as you turn around, you know, I live a life of privilege. I can come out whenever I want. And you turn around, and the people that you want to say thank you to are turning their cars around and going back into that. So that's what it felt like.
And sorry to go back to the difficult part of the question, the British government. What were your feelings? I mean, I remember in the news, I heard a lot from Alicia Kearns. She's not really part of the British government. She's the Foreign Affairs Select Committee chair, right?
Yeah.
So, but you'd expect your government to back you up, right?
So what would I do if I was in the British government? If there were 4 British nationals and an American national. If it was on my watch and 4 of my nationals had been affected in this way, I'd at the very least reach out to them. I'd at the very least invite them, even if it was just a PR opportunity. At least reach out and give an opportunity to say what you need to say and show some empathy. That's what I would have done.
Okay, so we don't need any further comment than that, I think. Amira, can we ask you the next question? This is probably the most difficult and most painful question. You are Palestinian. We've all heard the dreadful news from Rafah last night. Have you, by the nature of your job, have you heard any first-hand reports of what happened?
Yes, I have. So actually, the first messages and contact that I received was from a British doctor who is currently in Rafah and has chosen to stay. And he consistently messages me since he's gone in. And usually, I was just saying to Dr. Nick, usually his messages are pictures of watermelon stands or the beach and just life in Gaza and how people have continued somehow to create a sense of life. But last night, his messages during the attacks or just after the attacks were, oh God, it's a massacre, more than 70 people injured at his trauma point, and more than 15 arriving dead. And so for him to message me during that sort of activity really says a lot to me, because I sense that usually his messages to me to sort of instill hope in me that, you know, somehow people are still living and that there is still hope. So to get that from him, and then this morning from our PMRS teams that are on the ground, just, I mean, you've probably seen the images and there's no words really to explain, but, you know, one woman was saying how she had her 6 kids in the tent. She went to cook them something to eat, and she came back and she found them ash, and she was able to carry all 6 of her children in one hand, and she just couldn't let go of them, and she was still kissing and hugging them. And so for our medical staff on the ground as well, you know, they've been witnessing and they continue to witness types of injuries that they'd never seen before. And we can't say that they're using illegal weapons at this point, but, you know, the point is that they've never seen injuries like this before. And, you know, it's just continuing.
Thank you, Amira. Not sure really how to follow that up. Tayyib, can we ask you 2 questions for you?
Sure.
You've just heard accounts from 3 healthcare leaders, really, who are credible people, highly credible people, much more credible than our political leaders. in a nutshell, what are the legal implications of these stories?
So before I answer that question, I just want to make a comment, if that's all right. People ask me often about the work that I do and my colleagues at the ICJP, whether we fear for our lives because of the way that Israel operates and Israel's allies operate. And I think just listening to my colleagues on the panel today, I have a new answer for people. These guys put themselves in the firing line to save life. And they have no fear in doing that, or at least it's not apparent. And I think I'd just like you all just to acknowledge that for a moment and just to think how brave you must be to take a flight into a war zone where people are trying to flee and then go there with nothing more than medical equipment to put people literally back together. So can we just take a moment and just thank you. The first doctor I met was Dr. Professor Ghassan Abu Sitta, who had returned from Gaza. And this is answering your question now. I thought he was unique, actually, in what he is unique in many ways, but I thought he was unique. I thought there couldn't be more than one person able to do what he did. I've now met over 20 people that have given eyewitness testimony about what they've seen on the ground in Gaza. And I suppose to answer your question, I can't just rely at the moment on the shorter accounts that we've heard now, but looking at the evidence that we've collected, given to Scotland Yard and given to the International Criminal Court, that evidence taken together provided me with a basis for a series of criminal offences, international humanitarian law breaches. And just to put it into a nutshell, because I'm sure you don't want a legal lecture, but just to summarise it, the evidence that I've collected constitutes very clear breaches of international law, including attacking civilian objects, including the medical infrastructure. And also, really importantly, you may have noted last week, the ICJP launched a criminal complaint to Scotland Yard just after the ICC, Karim Khan, made an announcement that he was applying for arrest warrants. One of the allegations that he found was starvation. So we last week also issued a complaint about, in respect of at least 5 British ministers for their part in the war crime of starvation. Now, starvation is not just in the terms of stopping people from eating, but also taking away the mechanisms they require to sustain life. And we've seen that across the board. My view of the evidence that I've seen so far is that it's very clear. Israel, and I can say this in this way, Israel is targeting the medical infrastructure. Israel is targeting the civilian infrastructure generally. Israel is targeting civilians as a whole, and specifically targeting those people that could prevent the loss of life and devastation, including not just the medical infrastructure, but for example, the police infrastructure, the legal infrastructure, almost any infrastructure you could think of. That in totality forms the crime of collective punishment, but also is a significant element to the way forward to the crime of genocide. We haven't yet compiled a complaint of genocide, and that's simply because we are still collating evidence to be able to support that as an allegation. But we have clear evidence that Israel has breached, I would say, almost every element of the Geneva Conventions, the Rome Statute. And that makes my job difficult, but also very easy.
Thank you, Tayyip. And just moving really to a completely different aspect of what you do. So obviously, doctors and Amira here are very brave and very courageous, and we have so many examples of doctors such as that. But there's also seems to be a process, almost a sort of chilling effect on the medical profession as a whole. We know that several very senior healthcare leaders, we're talking about people at the level of president of a Royal College, the very top level of the British Medical Association, have been accused of anti-Semitism for speaking up for Palestine. What do you think is going on here? I mean, is the regulator, the medical regulator, being weaponized against doctors? And why specifically do you think doctors are being targeted? And how can we collectively speak up for Palestinians in this environment?
I mean, it's yes. I mean, the answer is yes. Our institutions are being weaponized against Palestinian advocacy. There are organizations like the UK LFI, United Kingdom Lawyers for Israel, that does exactly what it says in the tin, which is not look to regulate our medical profession and safeguard the public from potential misconduct by medical professionals. No, it doesn't do that. What it does is purely and simply act to protect Israel. And if it can do that, and I'm naming names, I'm telling you who I'm talking about. There's nothing sort of secret about this as far as I'm concerned. I'm prepared to point fingers where fingers duly should be pointed. Where what they are doing is they're trying to silence the voice of Palestinian advocacy across the board. So if there is a doctor that is speaking about Palestine, you will find that there will be either at the lower levels on the internet, on Twitter, on the social media, constant attacks or constant rubbishing of what they're saying, to the degree of also blatant lying. So factual misrepresentations about what they've said, or even factual misrepresentation about what's actually going on the ground in Gaza. But then it gets more pernicious than that. At the moment in my law firm, we're dealing with and protecting individuals that are defending themselves from the police, from criminal allegations, from the Charity Commission, from regulatory allegations, from the Law Society, the Solicitors Regulatory Authority, from allegations there, and from the GMC and the NHS. This is not something that's happening by accident. It's systematic, it's purposeful, it's organized, and unfortunately, these institutions, I feel, are allowing themselves to be used in that way, perhaps not by accident, perhaps purposefully, because they take their lead from the government. And the government, in my view, is complicit in war crimes in Israel and Gaza.
That was very categoric. Thank you for that, Tayyab. So
well,
Nick,
the answers might be tougher than your questions, maybe.
So next question is for Nick. Nick, this is really going to be a tough one. I'm really sorry. I have to apologize in advance. So when I first interviewed you on the 24th of March, your genuine love and passion and admiration for the Palestinian people really shone through. But at that time, you had met David Cameron to talk about the war crimes you'd witnessed. You'd gone to the United States, you'd spoken at the United Nations, you'd gone to the White House and spoken to at least one very senior administration official there. And your feeling was that they had understood the gravity of the situation. Knowing what you do now, knowing what's happening in Rafah, and knowing what the British government and the United States response to that is, do you think that you were invited to these meetings genuinely so that these people could learn from your experience? Or do you think that you were being co-opted? And I'm going to read out a definition from the Harvard Business Review of co-optation. Co-opting a group involves giving one of its leaders or someone it respects a key role in the design or implementation of a change. This is not a form of participation, however, because the initiators do not want the advice of the co-opted, merely his or her endorsement. Go ahead.
Yeah, that was a tough one, isn't it? Thank you, Musa. I would separate, I've thought a lot about it, and I know the conversations you and I had that perhaps you wanted me to say a little bit more in our previous interviews, and I understand that. And I suspect I'm probably prepared to do so now. I would separate the USA trip to the UK trip for the following reasons. I think we did meet, and I think we genuinely were listened to in the US, both at the UN and in DC. The only senior member of the administration we met, I've heard her speak on many occasions since, and I am quite clear that she is trying to fight a lone battle against Biden out there. The other people we met were sort of one tier down, and I think they not only listened, I think they were genuinely trying to change things, but they have been thwarted completely by their president. the situation in the UK was different, and perhaps I was guilty of being naive, I don't know. I'm certainly not a politician. I was at the time reasonably happy that there was a serious attempt to listen to us, but I think that was probably rather naive of us. I say us because it wasn't just me. I think it was a tick box exercise meeting Cameron and Mitchell. I think that when I go over the meetings we had, I think I told you I was pretty appalled by the way that Mitchell had behaved, but Cameron, we felt, had listened to us. And I think there was a period of time following that when his public statements were a lot better than they had, certainly his predecessor had been, but I think he's fallen well short of that level recently. And I think I think it was a tick box exercise. I don't think he was particularly interested in hearing what we had to say. And it was, you know, if I tell you what his comment at the end of it was, which I don't think I told you at the time, and as in relation to what Taz has just told us about the accommodation being blown up, and I'd been living in that house just a week before Taz, so can really feel the visceral description he gives of that. As Mitchell's final comment on that occasion was when someone had mentioned the word genocide, he looked up, having spent most of the meeting texting on his phone, he looked up and said any suggestion of a genocide is both obnoxious and hideous, and then got his papers together with a view to going out. Then Cameron got out and said, "Oh, and by the way, I'm very sorry you were bombed." Those were his final words. So, listen, I have changed my view a little bit since then, and I think they were not really wanting to listen, and they had no choice but to hear what we said. And indeed, I showed him laminated and large pictures of burnt children that we had treated, dead children with amputated limbs. So there was no question he was given the information with which he could have acted, but it was ignored.
Okay, thank you for taking that difficult question. Next question is for Amira. Amira, if we can just hand you the microphone. So, got an interesting one for you, hopefully very educational for all of us. You're a social impact specialist working with the Palestine Medical Relief Society. You've got a master's in public health, an MBA, so you know how money works. And my understanding is with PMRS, you basically work with multiple NGOs to help Palestinians access medical care in Gaza, the West Bank, Egypt. Can you tell us how that process is controlled? I mean, how does money move in the NGO industry? Who controls the bank accounts? How was Gaza's healthcare system funded when it existed?
Okay. So first of all, the Palestinian Medical Relief Society is the largest Palestinian-led and run medical organization on the ground. And we don't work with other NGOs, we lead the work. And we have teams right across Palestine, which is really unique. So we have our teams on the ground in the West Bank, in East Jerusalem, which is really important because that's where there's a massive gap. So technically, Palestinians living in East Jerusalem should fall under the Israeli health system, but we know that they don't fulfill their obligations under international law to provide that care. And medical teams from the Ministry of Health in the West Bank are not allowed to enter that space. So PMRS is actually working in that space, and that's really important. And I just want to add that we're not actually allowed to call ourselves Palestinian Medical Relief Society there. We're only allowed to call ourselves Medical Relief Society. So even just from that perspective, you start to understand the medical apartheid that exists. We also have teams in Gaza. Currently, we have 41 medical teams on the ground in Gaza. So to your point around the money, essentially any money that's coming in to Palestine that is foreign aid, let's say, and most of the money, if not all of the money, is actually controlled by Israel. So it has to go through Israel before it comes to us. Even Palestinian bank accounts are only allowed to hold a certain amount of money, and they have to go through all of the checks and the balances, and it's controlled by Israel, essentially.
And can you tell us a bit more about, for instance, the European Union? They donate a lot of money to Palestine. what conditions are imposed on the Palestinian people when these donations are made?
So the EU is quite interesting because as a collective, they're the largest donor for foreign aid, specifically for humanitarian projects and some development projects. Unfortunately, in the last years, the emphasis has been on humanitarian sector, and hopefully we get to that later, but rather than development. And I have issues with this, I'll just highlight it now, because the humanitarian sector is just a band-aid. It's meant to be a short-term thing. What we should be doing, what PMR strives to do, as Omar pointed out, Dr. Barghouti has spent his career essentially strengthening the healthcare system, and that's what we try to do. But it's not just the EU, but as an example, the EU places strict stipulations in terms of how we can use that money. And one of the sort of most, heinous, aspects of this is the fact that any organization that is receiving funding from the EU is not allowed to provide any of their services to any of the ex-detainees at all. And so as a healthcare organization, we're not allowed technically to be providing medical care to anyone that has been detained. And we know that these are our hostages, right? And it's not just since the 7th of October that we now have 4,000 people that are essentially held hostage, including a dear friend of mine. Over the years, we've had children, a lot of minors, increasingly over the last 10 years in particular. And so, this is how the humanitarian sector and the aid sector is complicit, essentially, in the apartheid regime.
Yeah, that's really appalling, especially when we know that many children are detained without any sort of legal process. Hundreds, thousands of children have been detained under those conditions. So apparently the European Union money cannot go towards treating those children. Is that correct? Okay. I mean, that to me seems to go against some very basic medical, ethical values. I mean, I treat prisoners all the time in the United Kingdom. They come to the hospital, they'll come with a police guard, but there's nobody, according to the European Union Charter, who should be deprived of the right to healthcare. But when it comes to Palestinians, even children who are being detained without any legal process whatsoever are denied care. Tayeb, next question for you.
Why are you laughing?
I'm laughing because I'm about to talk about what I think about international legal processes. So you might not know this. I actually did a law degree, and then I decided I wanted to become a doctor because I wanted.
Good decision.
I just got turned off by what I saw lawyers doing. You're a very different breed of lawyer, I have to say. But I want to talk about the ICJ, the International Court of Justice. They've recently ruled that Israel must immediately, I'm reading this out actually, the quote, Israel must immediately halt its military offensive and any other action in the Rafah governorate. And this is the bit that's a bit controversial. They've said after that, which may inflict on the Palestinian group in Gaza conditions of life that could bring about its physical destruction in whole or in part. Now, that organization of lawyers that you mentioned earlier, I've actually looked on their website, and their interpretation is that Israel's actions can't bring about the destruction of the Palestinian group, and therefore the whole ICJ order doesn't apply to them. And the ICJ hasn't ordered them to stop its invasion of Rafah. It's only ordered them to stop its invasion of Rafah if they're going to destroy the Palestinian group, which they're saying they're not going to do. So I guess my question is, what is the point of the legal wranglings in front of the ICJ? And is any of this actually going to stop Israel's war crimes?
That quote that you read out, read the last words, the last bits of the quote. What does it say?
Which may inflict on the Palestinian group in Gaza conditions of life that could bring about its physical destruction in whole or in part.
In whole or in part. In part. Full stop. So it doesn't matter what UKLFI say. By the way, the last order that the ICJ made, and the one before that, UKLFI considered it not to be by the UKLFI rubbish, right? Just frankly, right? They're probably the kind of lawyers that put you off, frankly, right? The dark side, right? Anyway, so what they originally were arguing at UKLFI, which was taken up by really senior lawyers, including people with Lord at the beginning of the name and Casey at the end of it, for what that's worth, anymore. And so what they were saying was that there wasn't even an order that recognized plausible genocide in Gaza. And when the former president of the ICJ gave her inappropriate, in my view, interview to describe what that meant, she decided that she could unilaterally interpret the judgment of 17 judges by herself and give voice to that, which is also inappropriate during proceedings. And what UKLFI forgot or purposefully missed out was the second part of the order in terms of risk of genocide, which is the reason why that was relevant was because of the provisional order requirement of irreparable harm. So if you only make an order to stop somebody doing something, if that order is going to prevent irreparable harm, you only ask people to stop doing something which is going to cause irreparable harm if there's a risk of something, right? Risk of genocide. So UKLFI, I'm really proud to say, blocked me on Twitter because I made that argument really strongly. It's like, you know, a good place to be on social media if you're getting blocked by UKLFI. But on a serious point, this is what they do. And this is why you're all so important, because there are people like me who can interpret the law appropriately and explain it appropriately. And I've just done that by asking you to read the last bit. So it doesn't really matter, without going into detail, the argument about this is that that order was badly drafted because there were commas put between and other places and a comma afterwards, right? But it doesn't matter. Read the whole thing as a whole. It's very clear what the court was trying to do. They were ordering an immediate halt to Israeli action in Rafah because if Israel didn't do that, in whole or in part, there was a risk of genocide. Israel hasn't done that. Israel is in breach of the order, okay? Can I just expand on this a little bit? Mm-hmm. Because I also, one of the reasons I became a lawyer was the exact same reason you didn't become a lawyer, because I saw how law was abused by people, how international institutions were failing. World War II is really important to me. When I was learning about World War II, there were a couple of numbers that were really important to me. They really left an impact on me. One was 6 million because of the impact of the Holocaust. But the other number that was really, you know, I remember learning about, as an infant school child, I think I remember, learning about World War II, but later on learning about a different number. That number was 75 million people, right? 75 million people died in World War II. That is a phenomenal catastrophe that human beings have caused on themselves. It's unbelievable. And then what we did, and I'll keep this short because I know there's lots of other people that have lots of really important things to say. What we did after that is we decided to create an infrastructure, a framework, a law-based order, not a rules-based order, a law-based order. We created the United Nations and the Security Council and the General Assembly, and we created the ICJ and the ICC decades later. These are really important because what they were designed to do as a whole was to stop not just 6 million people dying, and I don't mean to belittle that because that had a massive impact on me, but to stop us killing 75 million of ourselves again. I mean, that's an amazing thing we tried to prevent happening because we know ourselves, we know what human beings do if they're left unchecked. We needed rules, we needed law to prevent that from happening. We needed to check power at the top. And you can see what's happening right now. There is a separation between our leaders, the kinds of people that you met when you in the British government, and the rest of us, because we know what's happening, don't we? We see what's happening. We have it beamed on our telephones. We don't need these institutions to tell us what's happening. We know it, we see it. The problem now is that the institutions are not living up to their mandates. The Security Council is a failure. The General Assembly is a failure. The ICJ is a failure. The ICC is nearly a failure, not quite yet. We'll see.
Can I stop you there? Because my next question is about the ICC, actually. It's not often we get a lawyer of your stature at these meetings, so I really want to take full advantage of this. The ICC, in many ways, could potentially be much more effective than the ICJ. And the reason, my understanding is, the reason is because all the signatory states of the Rome Statute have an obligation, and in fact, the United Kingdom has actually enacted the Rome Statute into British legislation. What that means is that if somebody has an arrest warrant and they come to the United Kingdom, the British police have to arrest that person. There's a real mechanism for enforcing that arrest warrant. So potentially it's really powerful what's happening with the ICC recently. My question is, why do you think the ICC has started the clock on October the 7th?
Okay, first of all, the ICC, it's not the ICC, and this is relatively controversial for somebody who's a Palestinian advocate. The ICC's job is not to stop war crimes. The ICC's job is to hold war criminals accountable after the event. You don't arrest a murderer before he's murdered somebody. You arrest them afterwards, and you prosecute and punish them. The job of preventative justice is the job of the ICJ. That's why South Africa initiated proceedings under the Genocide Convention, and the massively failing and dysfunctional Security Council, who are meant to, people say all the time, the ICJ doesn't have an enforcement mechanism. It does. It has the strongest enforcement mechanism in human history. It's got the Security Council. The Security Council is composed of states with huge armies, including the United States. It's not working in the appropriate way. Coming back to the ICC, and your question, you're correct. The reason the ICC is really important is because once it's issued the warrant, it triggers obligations in 124 states across the globe to arrest, investigate, and prosecute, even potentially domestically, or hand over the suspected war criminal to the ICC. But you know what? We don't need the ICC to see what the problem is, because as you said, in 2009, I got an arrest warrant for Zippy Livni based on real, concrete, solid evidence given to a senior judge in the chief magistrate in a magistrate's court, whose job it was to determine whether that evidence should lead to an arrest warrant. He decided it should on a prima facie basis. That means on a basis that could be prosecuted without further investigation. My case was solid. When Zippy Livni came to this country, it wasn't the police that failed, or the arrest warrant that failed, or me as a lawyer that failed, although I do feel a little bit like a failure because of that. It was the politicians that created a shield of impunity to protect her. And the mistake I made, the mistake we made, lawyers like me that were working, which we are determined not to make this time, is that when politicians in the United Kingdom protected Zippy Livni as a suspected war criminal and let her walk up and down the streets of Britain and meet with politicians and then leave the country completely without arrest, investigation, prosecution, we left it at that because we always attacked the political actors in the theatre of warfare, i.e. the IDF soldiers on the ground, Zippy Livni as a command control politician above her. But this time, when we issued notices as part of the ICJP, shortly after the second week of the attack on Gaza, we issued notices to British politicians because we'd learned from our mistakes. We're no longer prepared for there to be a shield of impunity created by our politicians. Article 24 of Article 25 of the Rome Statute is the article that talks about complicity, aiding and abetting, or in any other way supporting the commission of a war crime. So if a British politician, the Attorney General, a police officer, the Director of the Crown Prosecution Service, decides this time, and you know that we've already issued complaints about British politicians in the United Kingdom under the International Criminal Court Act for prosecution and investigation and prosecution by the British police. But this time, if they do the same thing again, this time we'll be referring them to the ICC for prosecution, because as far as I'm concerned, that protection is aiding and abetting a war criminal, and we're not prepared to let that happen this time.
Okay, Tayyib, I'm going to give you a break now. Thank you for those very convincing answers. So next question is for Tahseen. Doctors, we love to be heroes. We love to save people. What can doctors who are going to Gaza really do for the Palestinian people? I mean, the healthcare infrastructure has been destroyed. There's nothing you can do now, is there?
Just a point of correction. If you're in this to be a hero, then you're the wrong person. We're not in this to be heroes, to be perfectly frank with you. I'm sure Nick will agree with this, that there's an element of discomfort sitting here because it comes with a sort of a celebrity element to it, which isn't very comfortable. The reason we put ourselves outside our comfort zone is because actually there's a narrative that needs to come out. What can doctors do from here? Having been there in Gaza, when you're in Gaza, your mobile signal's off, your internet's off. They've been like that for the best part of 8 months. So going just tells them that somebody cares, and they that somebody gives a damn, because they're just blind out there. They're deaf and blind. They don't know what's happening. They don't know that forums like this are happening, and it's desperately important that we let them know that we do care, however we can. And by the way, my skill mix is such that I'm lucky enough to go out there, but everybody in this room has something they can offer. And I say to people, if you're good at the written word, write the written word. If you're good at arguing, argue. Whatever you, and don't feel anybody in this room has any lesser role to play than anybody on this panel. That's one of the things I want to say. The other thing is that what can we do? To be brutally honest with you, Nick and I as doctors, we do not have the expertise that they have in dealing with war injuries and war wounds. So why do we go? To give us their support. Why do we go? Because they have incessantly been in hospital for 80 days in a row, and you operate with somebody and you realize they're then going to go home, in inverted commas, which is a 3x3 tarpaulin area within the hospital, which is where their family and their pots and their pans and everything are. So it's giving that support, it's providing relief. And we made the conscious decision to not become, this sort of, I'm going to coin a phrase, but a knight in shining armor coming and telling them how to do things. Actually, we're here to support you. Tell us how you need us to help you. That's what we provided. But it's relief for these doctors, because as you know, 70% of the nurses on the wards are volunteers. That there's a complete breakdown of the healthcare system. Doctors are going missing. Okay, I'm not going to use the word targeted, but our house was hit. But 650 healthcare workers have actually died. But because they happen to be Palestinian, there's almost an irrelevance about them, and I mean that in the best possible way. So providing relief, providing support, and just letting them know that actually there are people out there that care.
Thank you, Tahsin. So I've been told I've got 5 minutes before we move to audience questions, but I've got 2 really important questions, one for Nick, one for Amira. I do want, if possible, brief answers, but they're really important questions. So many healthcare workers don't understand how powerful they are. They're powerful because they're trusted, they're evidence-based, they're objective, they're impartial, and people trust them more than politicians. But despite that, many healthcare leaders have been afraid to speak out. You're a very senior healthcare leader who's got a lot to lose, and you have decided to speak out. At the moment, we've had 35 motions published by the British Medical Association just recently trying to stop what's happening in Gaza. And the committee within the BMA, which is considering those motions, has said quite publicly they're worried about being accused of anti-Semitism. What would you say? I mean, I'm going to be open here. We were in a meeting, weren't we, with very senior people within the BMA who said we have been accused of anti-Semitism. This was a discussion about what we should be doing for the people of Gaza. And some people might ask, well, it's irrelevant if you've been accused of anti-Semitism when you're being asked about what the BMA should be doing for the people of Gaza. But we had that in this group meeting that you were part of. What would you say to healthcare leaders about speaking out?
Be braver. I have a lot of sympathy for much younger medical students and doctors who are frightened or not sure whether they can speak out, because we have all heard of many instances of people's careers being damaged, and they are much more vulnerable. I have far less sympathy for people in senior positions towards the end of their careers, And I think they need to be braver. I mean, I would point out to them, they're not politicians particularly, they should be behaving in a humanitarian way. And that is the rule of thumb I've tried to follow throughout all of this, is really presented all from a humanitarian perspective. Of course, you can't separate the politics from it completely, but if your main focus is to point out what's going on from a humanitarian perspective, then I think everyone should be brave enough to do it. What Taz said was correct. Everyone can do something. Everyone needs to stand up. Everyone, whether it's individuals, academic institutions, healthcare institutions, governments, will be defined by how they react to what's going on in Gaza. And I'm afraid to say that we have been let down by our academic and our healthcare institutions in this country, and I suspect elsewhere in the world. And I think they need to be braver.
Thank you very much, Prof. Maynard. Thank you, Nick. And the final question from myself for Amira. So you've told us a bit about the financial story, the story of Palestinian healthcare provision, and the way it's constructed in a way to perpetuate the subjugation of the Palestinian people. Tell us about what you think about the importance of Palestinian sovereignty over healthcare and what needs to happen to rebuild the Palestinian healthcare system, and what can people in this hall, it's a big question, what can people in this hall do to make that happen?
All right, so let's break it down. I mean, I think when we're talking about Palestinian sovereignty, we can't have that conversation without acknowledging that Palestinian healthcare also needs to be owned by Palestinians. Because as long as Israel has control over our bodily autonomy, we will never be able to be free. And we need both, right? So we need to be working to end the occupation. This isn't just about a ceasefire, this is about ending the occupation and ending the apartheid, but also addressing the root cause for the occupation and for the apartheid, and that is Zionism. And that doesn't just exist in Israel or across Palestine, as we've heard. This Zionist ideology has managed to infiltrate academic institutions, political institutions, healthcare institutions. You know, we're hearing about our doctors, our healthcare workers who are here in the UK trying to advocate simply for Palestinian healthcare workers to have the right to do their work without fear of being bombed, without fear of their families being attacked, without fear of being abducted and tortured and killed. And so without having both the Palestinian healthcare being owned by Palestinians, and without addressing the root causes that I've just outlined, then Palestinians won't be free and Palestine won't be free. That's the first part.
And what can we do?
I mean, it's been said here on the panel, I think it's really important that it's not just about a skill that you have. It's about a passion that you have. So maybe you're an accountant, but you love photography. Or maybe you're a doctor, but you love cooking or writing. And I say that it's more about focusing on your passions rather than your skills, because this has to be a sustainable action that we're taking, because the road to freedom is long. And as I said before, this isn't just about advocating for a ceasefire. This is about ending the occupation and addressing the root cause, Zionism, once and for all. And so I think, Dr. Taz pointed out that as doctors, people might look up to you or any of us speaking up here as certain experts, but I can tell you from my own personal experience, I started as a Palestinian who grew up in Australia in the diaspora, who studied nursing, who always knew that she wanted to go back to her homeland to do what she could do, but I didn't know what I was doing. I just started to take one step after the other. And it's the same thing with Dr. Omar and the other doctors that co-founded Health Workers for Palestine. It was just literally following your instincts and taking one step after the other. Have those conversations with your communities, with each other. Just take those steps forwards and just make sure that what you're focusing on is the end goal, which is ending the occupation once and for all.
So I think it's time to move on to the audience questions. Do you think I'm going to be given a computer because my phone has just had an operational failure. Thank you. So Miriam, if you can close me down when we run out of time, and we'll just keep going through these questions in the meantime. So the first question, UK politics. Anyone of the panel who wants to take this question? With the general elections coming up, which political party can we vote for that will actually prioritize the Palestinian situation? Anyone want to take that question? Tayyip, thank you.
In the local elections, I put a tweet out, don't vote for genocide, right? And I think that's the point. I think there is no way, as a recent resignee of the Labour Party, that I could vote for the Labour Party under the stewardship of Keir Starmer. By the way, you note I'm not telling you what to do, I'm telling you what I'm going to not do. I've issued a war crimes complaint against senior members of the Conservative Party in government, so I couldn't vote for them either, right? And so what I'm going to do is to vote for anybody else in my local area that has good values. And I want to just expand on this a little bit, because people say to me, I live in an area where there's not very many Muslims, and I live in an area where the Palestine issue is not really commonplace amongst my neighbors. And so people say to me, what's Gaza got to do and what's politics got to do with me when I'm worried about school, I'm worried about the doctor's appointments, I'm worried about welfare benefits, I'm worried about that type of thing, I'm worried about the cost of living crisis. And I say, yeah, I'm worried about all of that too. I'm worried that my school doesn't have a mathematician. But what does Gaza tell me? I'll tell you what it tells me. It tells me the nature of the political beast that I'm going to vote for. If a person sees devastation across the globe, sees war crimes happening, and excuses it, I can't trust that person. How can I trust that person? Do I think I can trust that person to put my children's interests at home first? Absolutely not. Because what they're doing is, for whatever political, personal, financial ambition they've put before the lives of thousands of people, tens of thousands of people in Gaza, whatever they were listening to, whoever they were listening to, whatever made them make that decision, means to me that that person will listen to the same thing when it comes to my school, my hospital, welfare benefits, protecting the weak and the vulnerable at home. And so I can't trust that person. That's what Gaza means on a local political level.
Thank you, Tayyip. So the next question's got a great title, What Can We Do? And this is for Amira. And I know a lot of healthcare professionals are thinking this. How can we as healthcare professionals get involved in voluntary medical services to support Gaza?
So I think the first protocol is to join the healthcare health workers for Palestine cohort wherever you are. So we are across 45 different cities in the UK now and 70 across the globe. And we reached that by the end of December last year. And, you know, I think it's difficult at the moment, obviously, with what's happened in Rafah and the closing of the border. The ability to enter to volunteer on the ground in Gaza is very difficult. So I think by staying attached to Health Workers for Palestine is a first step, but also, you know, the West Bank has suffered almost the same number of attacks against healthcare, and just recently we saw what happened in Jenin. And, you know, look to organizations like the Palestinian Medical Relief Society or even MAP, who do work on the ground in the West Bank as well. For the West Bank, there's still the option of telemedicine, which enables health workers from all disciplines to be involved. And, you know, we're building also through Health Workers for Palestine and through our relationships, a body of sort of, let's say, health workers essentially to be able to tap into telemedicine for Gaza when we have internet connection and communication is stable. And I would say that I understand the sort of inclination to want to go into Palestine or to help specifically within Palestine, but currently, based on what I've seen in Cairo, there is a huge amount of need for Palestinians that have come out from Gaza for healthcare, and I really believe that digital health and telehealth can make a really big difference. And so that's why I urge you to join Health Workers for Palestine. I'm not just putting a plug in. We're sort of connected across the work that's happening both here in the UK, around the world, but specifically in Egypt and in Palestine. So,
thank you. And now, Nick, next one is for you. So you've been the chair of ALGIS, is that the right pronunciation? The Association of Upper GI Surgeons of Great Britain and Ireland. How do we get British associations and institutions to recognise the genocide and targeting of medics?
I think it's very difficult. I think you need to find like-minded. There are a lot of people of my generation who have been contacting me and saying, fantastic what you're doing, you're standing up, talking about this. And as Taz said, it's because we've seen things that we need to tell people about. And a lot of people have commented and said, yes, it's fantastic. And my response to them always has been, well, you need to start speaking up as well. Whether you've seen us or not, you can provide testimony which might be second-hand. And I've said that to a lot of people in very senior surgical positions, the majority of whom have not felt able, for whatever reason, to stand up and be heard. I think and there's many other people like me who've tried to do this, but they are, as I've said earlier, they are, I hesitate to say cowardly, but they're not brave enough. And I've said to them repeatedly, you've just got to do what is right. This is the right thing to do. It's not about politics. It's not complicated. Too many people say it's very complicated. It's not complicated at all, actually. Some of the history might be a bit complicated, but they've got to do what's right. So I would urge continue passing that message on.
Thank you. Next question. I think this could be thrown at anyone, but I'm going to throw this one at Amira again. I think you know the answer. Well, I know the answer to this. But I'm just interested because you're the chief executive of a grassroots movement of health workers who want to do something for Palestine, and it's been very effective. And the question is, there are many medical colleges in central London, such as the Royal Society of Medicine. Have they reached out to you in solidarity, the medical establishment?
no. It's a very short answer, no, they haven't. And actually what I want to touch on, sort of going back to the first question, is that we need health workers and healthcare students that are advocating for us here and around the globe as well. So it's just as important to sort of be on the ground doing the physical medical work. And I understand the satisfaction as a healthcare worker that you get when you're there on the ground face to face helping people, because that's why we do what we do. But the advocacy piece is in some ways, especially at this point in time, almost more important, because we need to be amplifying the voices of Palestinian healthcare workers, and we need to be advocating for them. And so these institutions that haven't contacted us, they will be hearing from us.
Thank you. I think this is a question for Tahseen, and I think it's a good question for you, Tahseen, because I did allude to this very briefly, but we didn't go into it in any detail. But before all of this horrible catastrophe happened, you were heavily involved in trying to set up tertiary services for cancer surgery in Gaza. This war is going to finish. Israel is losing, believe it or not. And there will need to be a period of rebuilding. And it's just been completely destroyed. So if, from your experience of building NHS services in this country, how would you go about establishing a healthcare system for Gaza?
And on that note, can I just add a quick vignette here, just to illustrate what's happening in Gaza at the moment? So unfortunately, we all remember the Manchester bombings. So the Manchester bombings took a first world healthcare system 3 weeks to clear the decks, to make sure that everybody was dealt with. Gaza is dealing with probably 2 or 3 Manchester equivalents every single day. in a healthcare system that's on its knees. My suggestion is that it's non-existent. It's just not fit for purpose. So that's just some context. So that leads into your question. I mean, my goodness, how can you set up? Well, the first thing is to have a willing. To have a willing and have to have a group of people, whether it's healthcare workers for Palestine, whoever, to plan. And we're already planning for when, not if, when this finishes. And I have to be very I have to take emotion out of it, because if I bring emotion into it, you tend to fall into a well of despair. And what we're planning for, and people have asked, what can we do? If it's something as simple as just adding £1 into the coffers of charities. Charities have got a deal of money at the moment. Let me give you an example. I won't name names, but there's a charity that told me that they've got about £80 million in the coffers, and you think, well, that's a lot of money. But just in my hospital, the healthcare budget for my hospital is about £250 million in 1 year. So actually, it's a drop in the ocean. But there's going to come time when the starter pistol will start, and we have to provide a healthcare service and a system. So the more money we can get into the coffers, and if you're, as like Amira says, if you're a surgeon that bakes, well, do a cake bake sale, whatever it takes to get money into the coffers. We're already talking with senior management in certain, and I think we need to just acknowledge the fact that we've got a couple of VIPs in the audience as well. I saw Hossam Zomlot come in, and we've got Sui Ang as well, who's one of the founder members of a Palestinian charity. But we're already making plans to decide what we do. If that's a rebuild within Gaza, I'm really hopeful that that's what it's going to be. Bricks and mortars take months and years, so we're in contact with people that do modular builds. So modular builds are things that take 6 weeks to come to fruition and 2 or 3 days to pick up. So modular builds. What if Gaza does not exist anymore? Take the emotion out of it. Well, then it's about developing hospitals in North Sinai, and we're already talking about modular builds in North Sinai, having a hub and spoke. You have a central hub where all the complex stuff goes, because remember, we're talking about 2 million people. That's not easy to look after. And then the spoke hospitals in the periphery. So the answer is we're already planning. The answer is that there is a huge will amongst the people in this room and out with this room, and even people that might be watching this. My suggestion and request and plea to you would be to keep this on front page news. I think one of the things that worries me, Nick, you sort of alluded to it, is that this is almost becoming back page news now. It's been going on for so long. In my hospital, there's almost an apathy that, okay, that's Gaza, that's what happens in Gaza. But it's forums like this, and it's panels like this that just explaining that actually this isn't what happens in Gaza. It doesn't need to happen in Gaza, and we need to change things. I think that answers your question.
Thank you, Tahsin. And I think, Tayyab, you wanted to come in. If I can ask you just to come in briefly on this, because we've got a final question.
Sure, no problem. Part of the work I did with ICJP was to lobby states. So we've totaled at least 26 states, either head of state all the way down to ambassador level so far. I was traveling to them and them coming here. And one of them, we lobby them in respect of international humanitarian law, accountability, but also the medical infrastructure rebuilding day after, day one after. And one of the state level financiers, if you like, said something to me, which is, why am I going to put £20 million, £30 million, £100 million into a hospital for Israel to bomb it again? And I think this is a really important point to take on board. We can't just rebuild the health infrastructure however necessary it is. We have to do that. That's not the only thing we have to do. We have to make sure that Israel is put into a position after this event that it can never be allowed to do it ever again. And that includes its ally, the United States.
So, very powerful words from Tayyab. Our final question is a bit of a surprise. So, I'm sure most of you have realized by now that we have a very special guest in the audience. We're very honored to have Dr. Hossam Zomlot here. And I've been handed I've been handed a question for Dr. Zomlot. So I'm going to read that out, and then I'm going to give give you my microphone so you can respond. So the question is, for decades, the Western world and the Zionist entity has made a mockery of Palestinian statehood. There have been countless international agreements, accords, and memoranda. The offensive in Rafah, in open defiance of the ICJ and calls for humanity, is just another horrific example. How do you still hope? Are Palestinians hearing about events like this one, protests around the world? What gives them and what gives you strength and belief? And what more can we do to make our voices even louder? Thank you, Dr. Zomno.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Akhi Musa. And what gives us hope is people like you, Musa, and the panelists here, all friends, the doctors and the health workers for Palestine, Dr. Omar, and the people in this hall. Meetings like this are very well followed in Palestine. You'll be surprised that they know every single detail. They know your names, they know what you do, they follow you. And you'll be also surprised that this is exactly what has been enabling them to keep going in such darkest of moments. They know that they are not alone. So allow me first to begin by thanking every and each one of you for giving that hope all through these dark 8 months from day one. And doctors, nurses, health workers have been in the forefront of this. And as a Palestinian ambassador to the UK, I am so proud of you, Omar. I'm so proud of British doctors who have really been in the forefront from day one. I just heard that actually by December, health workers for Palestine have achieved all this only a few weeks after the aggression began. So London, the UK, has become the epicenter. The delegations that were sent, the doctors that attended, made British medical sector exceptional in its humanitarian universalist approach and contributions. Do we have hope, Musa? Or that's all what have allowed us to sustain for all these decades, Musa? It's hope. If there is one reason why I stand here before you representing the Palestinian people, and why we still have Palestinian people, and why we're still fighting for our rights, it's hope. But the last 8 months have been awful there, including last night, as you may all have followed. Israel bombing a safe zone, tense, UN compounds dropping 2,000 pounds bombs, that horrible scene of babies, women being butchered by US provided weapons. Yet we do have hope, because guess what? Israel has been doing exactly the same for 76 years. The difference this time, it's no longer hidden. People know it everywhere. And I believe Israel has lost the war on the 8th of October. Has lost completely, irreversibly. They cannot repair it. What kind of an army would pride itself with the killing of women, children, innocent people? You're talking about more than 35. Israel has butchered 70% of them are women and children. What kind of an army would pride itself or show any sign of victory by devastating our infrastructure, hospitals, schools, mosques, churches, what have you? They've lost. But this is our time that we win. We win. And we go all the way. That's the hope. Number one, we must continue fighting for an immediate and permanent ceasefire. We cannot leave it only to politicians here and there. We should not let go of this. Because so far, with all the odds, Netanyahu and his government are pressing ahead. Number two, we must make sure that the issue of reconstruction and rebuilding and humanitarian aid is prepared yesterday, not to wait until a ceasefire is there, because as we just heard, the needs are immense. Number three, accountability. Let this be the last time. And the only way we can ensure that this is the last time is by bringing these war criminals to accountability. There is no other way. There is no other way. We must never, ever allow our children to be slaughtered this way again. And the never again can only be achieved when we hold these criminals to account. Number 4, sanctions. Sanctions. And this is not a demand, it is the obligation of every contracting party of international law. Every third party that still provides Israel, genocidal Israel, with weapons is complicit in the war crimes. So each country, including the UK, must immediately impose an arms embargo on the genocidal state of Israel. And the list of sanctions that we must all work for are long. We must sanction the illegal settlers, the illegal settlement products. We must sanction the companies that profit from the illegality and from our stolen land and stolen resources. And we are not inventing the wheel here. It was only international sanctions and the anti-apartheid movement that brought down the apartheid regime of South Africa. And this is our obligation, this is our calling, to suck oxygen out of this occupation. And I tell you, the global international efforts in the last few months have started showing. Because, you know, ordinary people are marking illegality by their own stomachs and pockets. And it's very effective. And we've got to continue. And lastly is the issue of recognition, the question. Sorry it took my time to get to your question, but this is the roadmap for us. Why are we insisting on recognition? Because, Musa, we were cancelled. The people of Palestine were cancelled 107 years ago. Guess by who? And guess where? Exactly where you're sitting right now. We were cancelled by a declaration by the colonial Britain or British government at the time that turned us, the original native population of the land that lived there for millennia, into merely non-Jewish minorities. When in fact at the time we were 98% of the population owning 96% of the land. And we were cancelled 3 times. First by the Balfour Declaration and that colonial arrogance and the British mandate. Then we were cancelled by the creation of Israel and Zionism, that exclusionist strategy and ideology. 2/3 of the nation were ethnically cleansed, and we were cancelled ever since then by every country, every capital, every government that has given Israel a veto power over our right to self-determination and statehood, including London. And that's why today we're telling everybody, if you do not recognize the state of Palestine, you are definitely complicit, not only in war crimes, but in the cancellation of the Palestinian people. So this is a process when we have to uncancel us and remedy a historic injustice that has been inflicted on us. That's number 1. Number 2, recognition of the state of Palestine is not a gift. It isn't a favor. It isn't a reward by anybody. This is the inalienable right of the Palestinian people, and must have been granted long ago. It's long overdue, and every country that hasn't done so has led us to where we are today, genocide. And finally, all those who argue, including the British government, that recognition has to come after negotiations and a peace process between the two sides. Seriously? Are you kidding me? Did you wait for a negotiation process between us and Israelis when you recognize Israel on day 1? Why is it when it comes to the Palestinian issue you mince your words and you try to throw the can down the road? Because you are not interested, you are not serious, you're double-faced, you're double-talking. Double-talking. Did you consult us when you promised our land in the first place? Recognition has got nothing to do with negotiation. And if you say it has to wait for negotiations, what does it mean? It means Israel has to accept. That's what it means. It means you give Israel the veto power. That's what it means. Seriously? You don't know that Israel is so adamantly against the creation of a Palestinian state? They tell you Netanyahu is so publicly proud that he is against the state of Palestine. And therefore, that's why today We are focused on getting that recognition, and on all of your behalf, I salute here Spain, Norway, and Ireland for doing what they've done in last week. They deserve your applause. And I salute South Africa for pressing ahead with accountability. And I salute Nicaragua for taking third-party complicit to the ICJ. And the last salute is for Sui here, Dr. Sui, because I love her so much, and we all love her so much for what she has been doing for a long time, since Sabra and Shatila. You are a mountain, Sui, a mountain of humanity and solidarity and devotion. And all these wonderful doctors are just taking your footstep and learning from your wonderful, inspiring history. So I will bow in front of you and tell you all, thank you very much.
I don't know how to follow that. I think it's, Umar's turn now. I just wanted to, do I thank the panel or do you want to thank the panel? You'll thank the panel. Okay, I'll thank the panel and then you can thank the panel. So, all I can say is it's been an amazing event. We've had some amazing speakers. We've had the presence of the Palestinian ambassador who's given us some very inspirational words. I just want to go back to what I said at the beginning of this, that this is not about us, this is about you. For those of you who are nurses and doctors and other healthcare workers, you are trusted more than politicians. And for those of you who are not nurses or doctors, you are still trusted more than politicians. So you really, this is your time, and this is going to happen. This is inevitable that Palestine will be free, but its inevitability lies in your hands. So with that, please, thank you to the whole panel, and we'll finish this event.
Musa, sorry to interrupt, but we've got this special guest here, and we can't not let her speak. So, Dr. Sui, this microphone's for you.
Hey. Dr. Zomlot, well, I think all that he said is completely true, except the bit about me. It's also true in one way, I'm older than everybody else, okay? But I just want to say one thing. All this wonderful, and there's so much to do, I just want to thank the young people who know how difficult it is to walk with the Palestinians, and yet you have come with them. I was with one of the encampment, and then we broke the gate, and we thought it was wonderful, and the students all got served, trespassing notice and so on. So the younger generation are the people who is going to carry this on. I would be dead by the time Palestinian is free. I hope not, but if it is, so be it, okay? We always know that if I don't get back to Palestine with Dr. Zomlot, you will, okay? And then the other thing is I want to address the panel, and this is for you, Thea. How do we protect the wonderful young people who are standing out and have everything to lose, but yet support Palestine? I mean, I'm old, I can go and break the law. Who cares, if the police come, it's not a problem, okay? I don't pay a mortgage, nobody can sack me, But the young people, maybe let him say a few words as to what we can do to support and encourage the younger generation, because you are the reason that we have hope. You are our inspiration for Palestine, and thank you for all the sacrifices you made.
Thank you, Sui. And you're one of my heroes, right? Right at the top of the list. Look, it's a really important. I'm going to keep it short because of time, but it's really important. Each one of you, I mean, Israel spends so much money and so much energy on its advocacy. It doesn't do that because it's not important. It does that because it's absolutely important. The number of Palestinians that are in the diaspora is huge. The number of people that support Palestinians in the diaspora are huge. The number is phenomenal. Each one of those people in its network has thousands and thousands or hundreds of people amounting to millions. But effectively, the globe is with the Palestinians. It's the power structure that isn't. It's incumbent on every single one of you to speak out on your social media, in your workplace, with your neighbors, with your family, with your friends. But when you do it with responsibility. There is no need to allow the frustration of the situation to allow you to make you say things that will get you into trouble. And so there's a whole, the best way to know what you can and cannot say without getting into trouble is to follow ICJP on our social media and also my Twitter, because I'm quite aggressive, as you've heard, but I'm not aggressive in a way that would get me into trouble because it's not necessary. There is so much that we can say that is important and effective without allowing our frustrations to overtake us. That's the best way that we can protect ourselves in the first instance. The second thing, I just want to give an earmark to ICJP and ELSC, two organizations that if you do get into trouble, if you contact them, they will try their best to help you. It's not always possible, so please excuse us if you've tried to contact us and capacity for us has been an issue. But if you do contact us, we will eventually get back to you and help you.
Thank you, Tayyip. But I'm afraid I'm going to have to extend by a few minutes because we've got a question from a British doctor who's in Gaza right now, and we have to respond to this question. I think it's a question for either Mira, Tahsin, or Nick. And this message is written to us with the sound of drones in the sky and strikes over Rafah. That's what this doctor has written. And his question is, what are the moral and political demands on healthcare workers who have borne witness to genocide against the Palestinian people? What does this mean for medicine more broadly as a political practice? So I think it's talking about the bridge between our responsibility to our patients, almost turning us into political actors. Do you want to take this, Amira?
I might start. Sorry, I'm a bit emotional because I think I know who that is. When you become a health worker, pretty much from day one, you're taught that every single person has the right to healthcare. And, you know, as I think it was Dr. Nick that mentioned that he had treated a prisoner at some stage. And I know in my nursing career that I also treated a prisoner. And you treat every single person that comes through that door in the same way. And you focus on the care that you need to give, and you give that care to the best of your ability. As healthcare workers outside of Palestine, we cannot carry that principle in our everyday work and know what is happening in Palestine, specifically to our healthcare colleagues in particular, and to the healthcare infrastructure, where we know, and it's not just the physical sense of hospitals and clinics and ambulances and our teams being attacked. Healthcare is an ecosystem that depends on food systems. You know, they've bombed and damaged our food systems, our water supply. Our universities is also part of our healthcare. You know, we need to be looking at things from a holistic perspective. So as healthcare workers that have the privilege and the safety of working outside where we are protected and we know that we're going to be protected, you cannot be working in this space and knowing what your healthcare colleagues in Gaza and your, you know, who could be potentially your patients, just everyday Palestinians, and not advocate for them. And I think that, you know, to the sort of political aspect of that question, healthcare is shaped by politics. There's no way around that. And so, you know, if we are watching what is happening in Palestine with that first hospital that was bombed, and we knew that if they were allowed, Israel was allowed to get away with this, we knew that this was going to set a precedent, and we knew that every single hospital in Gaza, and now we're starting to see it in the West Bank, and there's barely any news about it, there's barely any voice about it. And so when we're talking about protecting the healthcare infrastructure in Palestine, we're also talking about protecting healthcare around the world. Around the world. If we allow this, if we're okay with this to happen in Palestine, this is okay anywhere else in the world. And the only reason this is being allowed to happen comes back to a racist ideology that sees Palestinian lives as less than. And as healthcare workers, you cannot carry that duality. It's one or the other. So I think that we need to be looking at things from a holistic perspective and understanding that it's connected. And our healthcare workers in Palestine are not just heroes for Palestine, they're heroes for humanity, because they've dedicated their lives and they've put their lives at risk every single day, and not just since the 7th of October. They live and work under occupation every single day.
Absolutely beautifully put. We both know who that question has come from, and our thoughts are with him at the moment, who is being beyond brave in staying out there when he could have come out. This is the absolute essence of why I go to Gaza, and I think why a lot of us go to Gaza, and why we feel an absolute duty, moral, professional, to go and help the people out there. We all have different reasons perhaps for going to Gaza in the first place. We've all fallen in love with those. Taz, I think, said it beautifully earlier. Once you go to Gaza, you keep wanting to go back there. It's a beautiful country. There's a very, very beautiful people there. I have people who I consider to be family out there. We all do. And when we saw very rapidly after October the 7th what was happening, it was the absolute core of many of us that we had to be there to go and help. And to me, it's I said earlier, this is not complicated, this is simple. It's the absolute essence of being a healthcare worker, wanting to go and help there, and it remains so.
Just being the last person to field that question, it's very difficult to add anything more to the two eloquent voices before me. But all I'll say is that as a doctor, as a nurse, I'm blind. So what do I mean by the fact that I'm blind? I don't look at the person in front of me. They might be purple, they might be yellow, they might be black, they might be 50, or they might be 5, or they might be older than me. You're blind to all that. So you treat whoever you treat, and there is no baggage. You do what you do. You know, why do people like Nick and I go? I mean, I'm speaking, I'm sure, for both of us, but you know, we've been born into privilege. You know, I was afforded an education. I was afforded food and drink when I was able to. I was afforded a roof over my head. But I also know that people there have not been born into privilege. If I was born, I've got no control where I was born. I can't control that. I could just as easily have been born there. And if I was born there, I'd be begging for help and I'd be asking for help. So that's why we do this, because it's the right thing to do. So that's the moral obligation. And to be perfectly frank with you, politicians, I don't know, I mean, politicians are born like us, aren't they? And they grow up like us. And they seem to just cross this threshold and they become politicians. This is not politics. This is not race. It's not religion. It's not, this is just pure humanity. Is that how can you, and to be perfectly frank, I mean, it's almost humiliating that Nick had to take a laminated picture of a burnt, charred body to a politician. You know, are you kidding me? Are you blind? You know, we are living this in real time. You can have no excuse to say, well, actually, well, that's news to me. So what does happen to politicians? They lose this humanity. I don't understand. Somebody will have to explain that to me. But what we can do, other than treating people, is we can put ourselves in front of these cameras and feel quite uncomfortable fielding questions from Dr. Qureshi there. But it's about just explaining a narrative. This is what's happening. This is what we saw. That's our moral and political obligation. And if we have to do that in another forum, we have to do that in another forum. But that's how I'd answer that question.
So we're going to go to Sui for
Yeah.
some final words.
Yeah.
She always offers us great words of wisdom. And then we're going to go to Umar, and we're going to close the event. But
Okay.
go ahead.
I just want to talk to the doctor in Gaza. Okay. I was faced with this question 42 years ago. As a doctor, your patient trusts you with their lives, and it's an honor, whether you're a doctor or a nurse. They share with you their sorrow, their fears, their death, their family, the ones they love. And many times, during situations, the patients will actually give me a written piece of paper to give to their family. So, as health workers, we are technical people. We are endowed technical expertise. But what makes us different from a robot or an uncaring piece of machine, and what makes you different from some of the doctors who don't care, is because you are a human being. You are not only a doctor, you are also an advocate. You are a witness to a genocide. And there's enormous power because of your dedication to your patients. And because of that dedication, you have a right to speak up for them, to stand by them. And sometimes it's highly inconvenient because there'll be a lot of voices saying that, oh, doctors must be neutral. NGOs must be neutral. The neutrality applies only in a situation when there's no conflict. To be neutral in a situation of a genocide is completely, I don't know what to describe. Maybe Tayyip can find a word for me. It is actually taking sides. It is being part of it. I salute you. I'm very proud of you. But sometimes you must also get exhausted. So remember, you're also human. You have to rest when you can, even if you're sleeping in the operating theater and lock the door so that nobody can come in. That you must do. You can cry with your patient. You can worry for them. But on top of all, you are a witness for them. When they have no voice, your voice is their voice. And speak up for them. And when you have a chance, also stand with them. When you come back and you are, I'm excluded from going anywhere in Palestine now, okay? I want to apply for a Palestine passport, maybe I can go, but I think they, yeah. So I can't go now, I got a ban, many years ban, okay? But even here in London or anywhere in the world, you can talk about them. And it is a duty and an honor and a privilege to be able to stand with them and speak up for them, to give them voice.
I'm just going to hand over to Umar now, but before I do that, I want to say that Umar, because he's never going to congratulate himself, was one of a very small core band of doctors who decided to set up Health Workers for Palestine. He's always sitting in the background of these meetings, but I can tell you that none of this would have happened if it had not been for this man. So I think... And he's a true example of leadership by service. I've never seen such an example before in my life. So I just want to say that, and I'm going to hand over to him to close this event.
Wow. I don't know how to close after His Excellency's words and Queen Sui, as I call her words as well. But what I wanted to do before some closing remarks is we have some gifts, I think, for every one of our panelists. So starting from my far side, Professor Qureshi, thank you so much for this evening. Professor Maynard. Thank you so much for everything that you've said today. Tayyib, thank you for saving our asses when we're... And Amira, amazing sister and help. And last but not least, Musa, thank you so much for doing this incredible panel and your challenging questions. If you indulge me, I'd just like to make a few closing remarks. Whilst we were in this panel just towards the end, I actually received a message from inside Gaza from via Dr. Suhaib Al-Homs, who is the director of the Kuwait Specialized Hospital in Rafah. And he said, due to the enemy's expansion of the military operation in Rafah Governorate and the repeated and deliberate attacks on the hospital surroundings, the recent most of which was targeting the hospital gate, which led to the death of 2 staff working in the hospital this afternoon, as well as the injury of 5 medical staff, we announced that the Kuwait Specialized Hospital will be out of service. The working medical teams have been transferred to the field hospital, which is being prepared in Al-Mawasi area. This is a stark reminder of what the people of Gaza and the health workers of Gaza are facing every day. Every time we think there is a turning point in this ongoing genocide with a new horror unfolding on our screens, in our social media feeds, and this must be the time when our politicians and leaders will start to take action, they let us down spectacularly. The reality is there have been plenty of these opportunities. Whether that was the bombing of Al-Ahli Hospital back in October, the images of health workers' bodies being exhumed from mass graves at Al-Shifa Hospital, the killing of foreign aid workers in the World Central Kitchen. Another one of these turning points was seen yesterday with the images of Gazan children beheaded by the Israeli artillery and attacks in Rafah. And despite these potential turning points, our frankly spineless and impotent leaders have failed to do the right thing and to be on the right side of history time and time again. Our belief here is that the only solution for this is the power of the people, the power of grassroots movements, of concerned global citizens to be that turning point, to be that opportunity for breaking a global system of corruption, of supremacy, of settler colonialism, brick by brick. As our youth and students have so bravely demonstrated, this is the time for action by the people, for the people. We have an added responsibility as health workers in the UK and abroad to advocate for the rights of not only our colleagues in the occupied territories, but also the rights of their patients and their healthcare facilities, in that these should never, ever be a target. Allowing the systematic targeting and destruction of hospitals and clinics in this genocidal war to become the new normal has already degraded the very values that underpin international humanitarian law. If we do not use every ounce of our being to hold these responsible for these atrocities accountable now, then there will be nothing to stop the next war, the next conflict, the next genocide to occur, with attacks on health workers being part and parcel of this. If you tolerate this, then your children will be next. This is the slogan from the Spanish Civil War in 1936, and it applies exactly today in that same manner. My other message is that we as concerned citizens cannot continue to stay fearful and silent out of fear of repercussions for our jobs, our livelihoods. We must be unapologetic in the face of genocide. What kind of message do we want to give our children and future generations when they are told that we remain silent whilst watching a genocide unfold live on our phone screens? We have to fight back. We cannot continue to defend every time we are attacked. As Tayyib alluded to, every one of these institutions, medical institutions, including the universities, must be held accountable for their complicity in these war crimes. Furthermore, every institution that attempts to silence, scaremonger, shut down freedoms of speech and expression must be challenged. We are the majority, and truth must prevail. And I just wanted to, again, acknowledge the amazing volunteers, everyone who's helped, Mariam, Iman, Zainab, Mira, all of you. Please give them a massive round of applause for putting this together. And a special thank you to Simon, who was up here earlier. I can see you. Thank you, Simon, for hosting us again and being part of our family here. And finally, please do not forget to donate. There will be people with QR codes, with card readers hanging around this area, so please donate generously. All of this money will, in some way, shape, or form, go towards Palestine through the two charities that I mentioned earlier. Thank you so much for coming out this evening.
What Omar doesn't know is that we wanted to say a few words about yourself. And Ustaz Zumlat is going to talk to us and through us about this.
Thank you. Stay here, Omar. With this wonderful panel. You know, Omar will be leaving us only for 1 year next month to Toronto. First, we wish you every success in your onward journey. We will miss you. We're waiting for you. But this is an opportunity that might not avail itself to tell you how grateful we are, Omar, how much you have been a monument. Your team has prepared this little book for you. And I had sent a message, I'll read it. Dr. Omar Abdel Mannan has given the profession of doctors and health workers a new level of nobility and showed us what it means to be in solidarity with a just cause. I am proud, Omar, to call you my friend. We will miss you in London. So I'll give you a signed copy of this before you go. Before you go. And of course, we have the parents of Dr. Omar Abdel Mannan. Please stand up, please stand up, please stand up, please stand up. Actually, it's you who should be saluted. Yes, it's you who should be saluted. Absolutely. Yes, you must be so proud. You must be so proud. And we are all proud of him. And of all the doctors here. And Omar, you have carved your place in our hearts for a long time to come. So did all of your colleagues here. And Professor Sui, I have a promise, 2 promises for you, 2 promises. First, you will get a Palestinian passport. Second, Palestine will be free in your lifetime. In your lifetime. Thank you.
Free, free! Free, free! Free, free! Free, free! Free, free!